Gamer Type Originals.
So begins my military career. The chessboard now lay before me, filled with the possibility of ultimate victory.
Rico! It's been so long! Years! You still don't cover yourself. You must always cover yourself. This is pure insanity!
Here's a great top-level question to start a lengthy game review. Why do we like games? And more specifically, why do we like our favorite games? I've been told I'm a pretty cynical guy, but I can buy a best-selling game and regret my purchase inside of an hour. For me, above all things, a game has to be fun. Sure, a game's graphics may impress, there may be 900 multiplayer modes, there might even be a decent story or characters or some innovative function that no other game has pulled off yet. But these are all checkboxes on a clipboard. A lot of times, they're just flourishes. What makes a game fun, moment to moment, hour after hour, is the gameplay loop that beats at its core. Former Bungie designer Danny Griesmer is famous for coining the term 30 seconds of fun, a philosophy that makes action games like Halo so enjoyable. If you can create a 30-second loop of fun by dispatching a group of aliens, you can then lump those little nuggets into a 5-minute set piece, then lump those set pieces into missions. Mix up the conditions from mission to mission, and you can stretch that little 30-second loop of fun out for hours. Let me give you another example. Stumbling upon a vein of valuable minerals in Minecraft to build a really cool thing is a 2-minute loop inside another hour-long loop. Racing games are literally loops inside other championship loops. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game with so many different gameplay loops that even if one doesn't stick, there's always something else you can do. When a game isn't fun, everything else has to work that much harder to get it to a passing grade at all. Final Fantasy XIII's battles aren't terribly fun, but I'm interested in seeing where the story goes. Alan Wake's story is incredible, but I never want to play it again. Destiny shooting is incredibly enjoyable, but almost every reason why you do it sucks, which goes back to Griesmer's point. You need to mix it up a bit. Then you have games with loops that work so well that they don't really need much of anything else, and I'll give you 2 examples. Even after playing the half-hour demo for 2007's Crackdown dozens of times, I still plunked down full price to climb the puzzle-like structures of Pacific City over and over again to collect agility orbs. The other is Just Cause 2. I'd never played the first game, but when I saw the kinds of beautiful rampage you could create in one of the largest and most diverse game worlds ever, I was sold. I ditched the story early on and went from village to village all the way up the map, seeking out parts and blowing stuff up. I only stopped playing out of sheer exhaustion. I'd wander for hours, following my antenna strength tracker trying to find the next objective so I could complete each settlement. It's easily my second favorite game of the past decade, and my love for Just Cause 2 is almost completely irrational. It may be a relatively aimless open world game with a crummy story, but developer Avalanche set up a fantastic 30-second loop, a good 10-minute loop, and then removed the obstacles to letting those loops stretch on for dozens of hours. Just Cause 3, of course, has a tough hill to climb, not just because it's the follow-up to one of my favorite games ever, not just because it's been nearly 6 years since that game stole my heart, but because Just Cause 2 has such a simple, successful formula that any disturbance of its purity can ruin the entire mix. So with all that said, let's see how Avalanche's new American studio handles the task.
Some disgusting homeless man asked me for money for food. He's leaving town. You know what I did? I hit him with the butt of my gun and knocked him out.
Set years after the events of Just Cause 2, action badass Rico Rodriguez returns to his homeland of Medici to topple yet another despot, General Sebastiano di Ravello. The general is planning to use Medici's vein of bavarium, a very potent mineral exclusive to the archipelago, as a weapon to conquer the world. Rodriguez links up with a number of his friends on his crusade, including childhood pal Mario, who happens to be the leader of the local resistance, as well as Di Ravello's former chief bavarium scientist, Dima. The plot's only a hair thicker than your typical action flick, and the hyper-specific missions often feel out of place compared to the adventures you'll have in the sandbox, but it finds a way to be enduring nonetheless. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Despite being roughly the same size as the subtropical Panau from the last game, Medici sheds a few of the standout biomes and feels more homogeneous from island to island. If you played 2014's Forza Horizon 2, then Medici's terraces, Italian-style housing, and weird farm plots are going to be very familiar. Medici produces wallpaper-ready vistas with almost every frame. Helping you along is an equally gorgeous flat-style interface that sheds all the nasty chrome from the last game. Like Horizon 2, however, its white on-screen trackers tend to disappear into the scenery a lot. I can't count how many times I need to stop what I was doing and look down at a dark scene just to see where I was supposed to go or to find collectibles in the environment. Rico Rodriguez is a force of nature, a veritable Superman. He can fall from terrific heights with only a brief stun to penalize him. He can call in a galaxy of weaponry and vehicles on demand, and he can transmit across the land easily with the help of an infinite supply of grapples and parachutes. Just Cause 2 granted Rico the ability to anchor onto anything in the environment, allowing him to zip across Panau's expanse with ease. If you deploy your parachute mid-zip, you can float away, giving you a temporary platform to drop bombs and gun down foes. For Just Cause 3, Avalanche has gone a step farther by giving Rico a wingsuit, an addition that originally confused me. The problem with the parachute alone is that if you manage to get too high or too far away from a grapple point, you could get stuck in a slow float unless you shed the parachute and did the grapple dance again. With the wingsuit, you can trade out your stationary advantage for mobility. If you want to switch back to your parachute, you just press a button. It takes a little getting used to, and Rico often becomes the camera's enemies as you try to guide him through narrow wingsuit hoops, but soon you'll be moving around Medici like a well-armed bird of prey. The tether also has another trick that the last game didn't have, the ability to self-retract. Just Cause 2 had tethers, sure, but they only worked between fixed points. If you wanted to pull down a statue, you needed to tether it to a vehicle and then drive that vehicle away. No longer. This little addition single-handedly turns your tethers into a powerful new weapon. Lace up any 2 points, pull the trigger, and you've got an instant drawstring system. The potential is practically limitless, and limitless destructive potential is one of the many reasons why we're playing a Just Cause game in the first place. Medici is a completely open world to mess around with. You can commit so many different and random chaotic acts that they might as well have just turned one of your controller's face buttons into an instant YouTube uploader. It so happens that this reviewer has a rubric for evaluating sandboxes that I didn't just make up for my Watch Dogs review to sound smart. Ladies and gentlemen, it's OBI-OP time. Let's see how Medici measures up. An action sandbox needs opportunity, so you've got to be sure there's plenty to do or you're going to wind up bored pretty quick. The game's first line of defense is its story campaign. You work with Medici's rebels mission by mission, but unlike the previous games, there are elements here that don't unlock until you move the story along. These missions are buffered by cutscenes, although they trade down for motion comics in the DLC. Honestly, I fell in love with this ragtag crew of would-be heroes and ambitious mercenaries trying to overthrow Di Ravello, while your CIA handler Tom is trying to play off every side.
Come on, kiss my cow face.
No.
More, Rico.
No! Where are you? Tell me where you are so I can kill you.
Just Cause 3's massive world is divided into 3 big regions, subdivided into provinces, subdivided into settlements, subdivided further into checklists of destruction. This isn't the freeform willy-nilly nonsense of Just Cause 2. Your progress is gauged by territorial acquisition. If you're familiar with my reviews at all, you know that completing objectives to cause zones to change color in both the world's scrawled graffiti and on a big map is pure catnip for me. If every game included some sort of paint-by-color domination scheme, they'd all get an extra point on my scale. Just Cause 2 featured 368 villages, towns, and military bases to deliberate, a monstrous total that gets pared down to a mere 130 here in the name of focus. What you need to do in each settlement is clearly outlined, whether blowing stuff up, blowing stuff up, blowing stuff up, multi-stage tasks like racing from rooftop to disable monitoring stations, or letting your rebel friends overrun police stations. Cutting down the size of your Conquer the World campaign gives the game plenty of time to express its creative side with side activities that previous games had largely ignored. There's plenty of land, sea, and air sprints that unlock as you seize territory. There are Bavarium collection minigames that are kind of fun when you finally figure out how they work, largely without the game's help. What about hopping in an explosive-laden vehicle and then racing full speed at a target? Pretty exciting. All of Just Cause 3's sprints and wingsuit events are designed for repeated attempts. Don't be discouraged if you can't mount anything higher than a 2-gear rating for the first 30 times you try a challenge. When you've completed enough of these events, you'll be able to unlock the extra skills you need to do better, to get better gears, to unlock better skills, on and on. It's an interesting and counterintuitive idea, but I wish they'd had more events to flesh the mechanic out. When the structured events start to thin out, you'll get little opportunities, randomly, to help your fellow Medicians. Sometimes their car runs out of gas and you need to tow them to the nearest station. Maybe you need to hijack a limo to pick up one of Di Ravello's high-level officers and then make them die in mysterious circumstances. Maybe someone's gate is stuck. No problem. Actually, the only problem is that these little pop-up quests are generally useless. Sure, some will unlock new points to pick up fast travel flares or supply beacons, but the reward is usually chaos points. Chaos points gated your progress in Just Cause 2, but they've been deprecated here in favor of territorial acquisition, which means they're just a number that gets continuously higher now. Heck, you'll get chaos points for stuff you don't even have a hand in. Just randomly, the game will inform you that something blew up, and you'll get points for it. Despite the game's campaign driving the empathetic notion that you're helping your fellow countrymen depose a monstrous dictator, the game is pretty indifferent about how you treat your fellow citizens. Beat them up, blow them up, run them over, who cares? You'll only attract opposition when you're murdering Di Ravello's uniformed men. Granted, you're not hoovering up cash when you run over a crowd GTA style, but it seems a little weird that there's no karma system in place to prevent you from being sloppy. Maybe that would have been a bit too much to think about. Buildings and structures, just like they do in real life, represent hubs of activity. In case I haven't made this point crystal clear yet, blowing up stuff is a huge friggin' deal in Just Cause, and it's a huger friggin' deal here. I mentioned your tethers earlier, but you'll gradually unlock a series of progressively lethal weaponry, like SMGs, assault rifles, grenade launchers, and plantable explosives. Because you don't upgrade your instruments of destruction the same way you did in the last game, and your health is now a large recharging amount, you no longer need to wander around settlements tracking down part crates or first aid kits. This means you can focus entirely on the knocking stuff down part of the game over and over and over again. And let me tell you, knocking stuff down is fun. Settlements come in different sizes, but only two flavors: civilian settlements and military outposts. In towns and villages, you'll need to turn Di Ravello's police stations inside out, knock down statues, and blow up propaganda vehicles like billboards, speaker systems, and propaganda vehicles. In military bases, you'll lay waste to a variety of fuel canisters, SAM sites, and power stations. In either case, Di Ravello's persistent counter-programming is always amusing.
Yes, I mean, as with any industrious nation, there's always the occasional infrastructure shake-ups. That's why I assume I'm broadcasting from some sort of underground bunker. Well, carry on. Viva Medici!
Di Ravello has recruited many of your fellow Medicians to become his evil troops, and it seems he picked the underachievers because they're little more than fodder. They don't become dangerous until you've poked the hive and they start spilling out like candy, sniper rifles and all. When it's time to fan the flames of war, the game has a card up its sleeve. The destruction isn't merely canned, beautiful animations like its predecessors, it's physics-based out the wazoo. Don't waste your precious bullets trying to light up gas tanks like a chump. Use tethers to rip out their supports and cause a chain of fiery destruction. Tie a bunch of these canisters together like a spider web, pull the trigger, and have some popcorn ready. Hack a base's SAM site deterrents, then rain hellfire from above in a rocket copter. Plant a string of bombs, flee the scene, then set them off as you walk toward the camera like a badass. Shoot out guard tower legs and watch it crumble like 5th grade toothpick architecture. It's incredible, every single time. That's your 30 seconds of fun right there. But the dynamic destruction does leave questions, like, what's the point of opening a gate to let my rebel friends storm a police station when I just blew out a huge chunk of the nearby wall? Creating Just Cause 3's transport infrastructure seems like a moot point. There are plenty of roads to get you from point A to point B along curvy shorelines, but you'll rarely ever use them. It's a problem all pedestrian action sandbox games have, whether it's Just Cause, Infamous, Crackdown, or the Last Saints Row title. You can move around on foot so easily via parachute, grapple, and wingsuit that jumping into a vehicle and driving cross-country is a bit of a downer. Just Cause 3 encourages you to hijack the world's vehicles and turn them into Mario's mini garages so you can redeploy them at any point, like Pokemon. But why? Sadly, despite their presence in pre-release pitch materials, you don't get to blow up bridges nearly as often as I would have liked. Open space is another critical area in an action sandbox because it dictates the kind of activities your game can provide. If you're playing an urban shooter like Grand Theft Auto 5 or Watch Dogs, you're giving up a huge chunk of real estate to non-interactive buildings. You have to give props to Avalanche because Medici isn't just wide open and beautiful, it's also 3D. Medici isn't just a series of height maps, it's sculpted. There are caves and tunnels, even entire subterranean bases. I almost wish the game took even deeper advantage of their 3D environments, but then I remembered how many times I would check the map to find the last target to complete a base, and not know whether it was in a tunnel, or on a cliff, or on top of the world entirely. You may not remember Codemaster's racing game Fuel, but it highlights the end of the spectrum where having too much open space in a game becomes a liability. In that game, developer Asobo created an environment the size of Connecticut and then sprinkled some activities amongst its vast expanses. It was very empty and you felt very alone. It was a very disarming feeling. In Just Cause 2, there was always some new village or airstrip to liberate every quarter mile, and you did it in a world that had a lot more variety. The problem is that you never connect with Medici in the same way you did with Panau. When you're plundering each village in Just Cause 2, shaking out every nook and cranny trying to find that last armor part, you get a little attached to each town and its base layout. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to spend 5 minutes wandering around aimlessly trying to track down the last 1 or 2 targets, but it really gave Panau its own character. Taking over settlements in Medici still boils down to a last stage, where the hell is that last thing I need to blow up affair, especially frustrating when clearing some of these bases can take up to 45 minutes. Thankfully, the map confines the area you should be looking in. It's helpful in that you spend more time checking off objectives because the game's requirements are far more cut and dry, but you also spend less time experiencing the detail of the world. Years later, I remember more of Panau than I do Medici. Remember, both games are roughly the same size, but Medici hacks out 2/3 of the settlements. With fewer settlements, narrower search areas, clearer objectives combined with your new wingsuit, Medici is largely a land you skip past. While the density of Medici's southern islands feels a little light compared to Just Cause 2's tropics, it's not until you reach the northern landmass of Strita that you really start to feel lonely. It's like surfing over Wyoming, complete with a large number of extremely tedious Bavarian strip mines to dismantle. There's rarely a moment, like in Grand Theft Auto 5 San Andreas, where you can stop to appreciate the local flavor. A lot of Medici's beauty is hidden away because the game gives you little incentive to investigate the detail. Unless you're on the hunt for collectibles, you'll never really get to enjoy what this glowing archipelago has to offer. It's disappointing that they built so much world here and then decided not to do much with it. Finally, we have the periphery, which is where we find our air and sea adventures. Grappling and parachuting might win this category over by itself, but hopping into a chopper and liquefying Di Ravello's forces is a blast. Because the game features so much verticality in its world design, you'll have to keep eyes up and down against threats from bombastic destroyers and enemy helicopters, which are easier to hijack than ever. Unfortunately, all these structured events out here are kinda... nah. Wingsuit diving takes some getting used to, but once you stop flopping all over the place and adjust to the suit's subtle nudges, it becomes a lot of fun. Flying through these hoops Superman style will make you more confident using the wingsuit throughout the rest of the game. The sea and air sprints, however, feel tacked on, and their self-serving rewards don't contribute much toward your ability to demolish Di Ravello's war machine. Of course, if you want to get anywhere near finished with your Medici tour, you're going to need to toggle some switches.
Re-establish visual contact.
What good is any modern action game without some RPG-light personal development? Sure, changing all those red shaded regions to blue is pretty good, but what if you didn't gain any new abilities along the way to make the conquest more fulfilling? Just Cause 3 builds a lot of Rico's progression to the game's secondary challenges. Whenever you race that explosive van, whenever you dive through a ring just right, whenever you dump the nitrous and speed through a checkpoint, you acquire gears that allow you to build skills across 8 different fields. Remember, you're going to suck at these challenges at first, but when you acquire even the smallest amount of gears, you'll start unlocking new skills. There are plenty of upgrades to play with, but the entire system has a few problems. You're not going to care a whole bunch about getting nitrous boosts for your cars, ships, and aircraft if you only use them in the very events you participate to upgrade those skills. Secondly, a lot of these upgrades come way too late. The talent trees appear to be built on the notion that if you had the ability from the get-go in Just Cause 2, it has to be doled back to you over the course of 50 hours in Just Cause 3. Before you earn the precision aim perk, which would be the left trigger in any other game, you have to deal with a rambunctious auto-aim. Being able to carry more than 4 explosive charges or hitch up more than 2 tethers would have been nice to have earlier on too. Finally, the ability to turn every single one of these upgrades on or off is largely wasted. Sure, I can see why you turn off homing grenades because they rarely go where you want, or rocket-powered explosives because I usually want my explosives to go off on demand rather than after a fireworks show. But unless you're a crazy person, why would you ever turn off stronger tethers, nitrous, or faster supply drop reloads? Ever! It doesn't make any sense to make all of them binary when only a few of the perks benefit. Shifting gears to geography, you'll eventually encounter Medici's trio of master military bases, each guarded by a superweapon. I defeated the first base despite a constant barrage of insane air power, but this was before I realized that the story missions allow you to disable these uber defenses, which, unlike Just Cause 2, can be a good reason to play the story missions at all. Victory over each region requires playing a final mission in which you hop between hotspots against Di Ravello's forces. These clashes give the game a kind of tabletop battle feel, because until these specific moments, you, Rico Rodriguez, are a one-man show. Sure, Mario's forces show up after you knock Di Ravello's forces out of each town and military outpost, but paving the way is a lonely road. You're blowing up sphere tanks alone, you're scaling monstrous radar installations alone. All of the secondary events are called sprints instead of races, because you're all alone. Leveling Outpost to Dust is redefined in every way from Just Cause 2, but not in a way that makes me feel that 6 years have passed since that game released. Even as you liberate each region and capital, there's no intra-region consequences for your actions. If you destroy a military base, Di Ravello's forces don't get any weaker, become more strategic, or rally in a desperate defense. Knocking down radar arrays doesn't slow his forces' reaction time. The entire map is essentially one static checklist, and there's no sense that Di Ravello is reacting to your moves outside of the story's narration, which already feels detached from everything you're doing anyway. Even if hopping from territory to territory swapping colors is bliss, it really just feels like you're playing with bubble wrap. Pop, pop, pop. Then there's the technical issues. The game crashed multiple times. A story mission bug caused Rico to react as if he's being hit continuously even if no one's firing at him, preventing you from completing the mission until you restart the game. The load times? Oh god, the load times are the worst. Booting up the game cold is excruciating, as is any time you reload after biffing an event. You'll start to hate wingsuit challenges when you're spending as much time reloading as you are falling from the air. Then there's the performance issues. Just Cause 2 ran at a steady clip, but the physics and mayhem in this game caused the game to run like muck, easily driving the frame rate down into the single digits. Thankfully, the simulation is tied to the frame rate, so enemies aren't getting potshots on you while you suffer in molasses mode. Even the beautiful 2D menus that you'll spend a lot of time in have a distracting hitch as you tab through them. Then there's the connection issues, which have been non-existent for a while, but were especially maddening after Christmas when I spent most of my time evaluating this game. Just Cause 3 requires you to connect to the Square-Enix servers to upload leaderboard and save data. The game values this connection so much that as soon as it feels the slightest tremors in the force, it will stop the entire experience cold and let you know that the connection has been disturbed. At its worst, it would happen every 5 to 10 minutes while in the middle of an event. It was a genuinely awful experience and completely inexcusable. Even in this new modern era of always-on connections for single-player content, if it had saved the panic attack until after I'd completed the challenge, or if it hadn't arrested my controls in the process, it would have been infinitely more tolerable. I doubt anyone would have died if my console had simply cached my hot wingsuit runtimes until the server was available again. Between the territory mugging, the secondary challenges, and the game's random encounters, the game really feels like a discombobulated buffet of components strung together, as if the objectives of the game were divvied up between a number of game designers who never communicated with each other. Playing any particular event never really feels like you're affecting much of anything else in the world. Here's the one spoiler I'll throw at you in a game that has maybe 3 or 4 things to spoil. The final battle against Di Ravello sucks. There's no climactic storming of his mansion, or dramatic sequence of chases and engagements. You fly out to a volcano and blast away at his Bavarium-shielded chopper until the energy shields cycle. It feels like a mechanically cheap 90s era boss battle tacked on as a last-minute climax. Then again, placing your anticlimactic battle with Di Ravello after a decently fun 50 hours of game time, which is a long tour for any video game, almost feels appropriate because what do you do afterward? There's nothing to do. I've already liberated every province, so I guess I can finish up all these sprints and challenges I skipped over? Well, I've already captured every territory, so I don't really think so. I did take the opportunity, however, to find all of the Dictator General's audio logs. Yes, all 71 of them. Buried inside this lengthy collectible hunt is the real meat of the story, a tale told over 20 years detailing Sebastiano Di Ravello's rise to power, and an explanation for every character and event in the game, including Rico's entire backstory, something the narrative sorely lacks. But even if you've plundered for every last collectible, something I never ever do, you're back to feeling desperately lonely again. Not just because there's nothing left to do, but because there's also no multiplayer. It's frustrating to think that Avalanche brought in the maniac geniuses behind Just Cause 2's multiplayer mod just to send them away with a good luck, so they could build yet another mod instead of building multiplayer into the game directly. But wait, maybe DLC will make things better.
Coordinates. Come as pronto as you can, buddy.
Not really. If you're familiar with the Nth Review, you know 2 things. I hate DLC, and I'm a sucker. Since I had to sit on this review for so long because of desktop issues, I felt it was in my due diligence to evaluate the first nugget of the game's Air, Land, and Sea DLC. The first adventure to tumble down the line for a whopping $12 American is Sky Fortress, a standalone story that introduces the evil Eden Corporation and their giant, well, evil Sky Fortress. The expansion introduces some new mechanics to the wingsuit, transforming you from free-spirited stunt glider into the Rocketeer. With your new jetpack, onboard weaponry, and evasive gestures, Rico begins to feel like one of the alternate history prop planes of Xbox classic Crimson Skies. The Sky Fortress itself is essentially another major military outpost with tons of little trinkets to blow up along its topside carrier deck and, frustratingly, underneath it as well. The map, as always, lends no favors to depth perception. You'll spend most of your time diving in straight lines, mowing down drones, idling excavators, or, really, scanning the carrier up and down trying to find out where the hell is that last thing I need to blow up. The story offers a big injection of science fiction intrigue that the main game flirted with, but just as soon as you're getting used to the new mechanics and themes, the whole thing's over. At 2 hours long, I'm kinda disappointed because I've already sapped the main game of all its enjoyable content, and I genuinely have no use for blowing around Medici in a rocket pack. If you haven't picked up the game yet, hey, maybe you'll get a lot more out of it than I did.
I'm the one infected.
Despite being a refinement of the formula in every way, Just Cause 3 barely feels like more than the sum of its many, many parts. I felt less fulfilled completing the entirety of this game in a week than I did not conquering every last outpost while ignoring the entire story in Just Cause 2 all those years ago. This is the part of the review where I think out loud about how the developer could have thought bigger or newer. It's easy for an observer like me to sit back and play armchair game designer, but then I go back to my cynicism about most modern game design. If you're gonna charge me $60, you need to bring me something new. It's why I fell in love with smaller, more adventurous games. If I could go back and catalog every issue I had with Just Cause 2, I know that Avalanche spent a lot of time coming up with a solution for them in Just Cause 3. The last game felt like they developed this crazy fun 30-second game loop, generated a massive playground to take advantage of it, and it wound up accidentally working far better than they could have ever imagined. This time around, Avalanche had to spend a lot of energy not breaking that magical formula, and it's a tricky spot to be in. In fact, there are aspects of Just Cause 3 that feel over-designed, as if they had too many ideas on board, and with the budget to squeeze them all in, they did just that, creating a smorgasbord of tangentially related activities. My feelings about this game remind me exactly of my reaction to The Elder Scrolls Oblivion when it released a decade ago. I'd loved Morrowind so much, despite its flaws, and it kinda wound up being this massive success for a developer that only really developed PC games at that point. Not only did Bethesda fix a lot of Morrowind's issues in Oblivion, they also took out a lot of the free-form, make-your-own-fun aspects as well. Despite being a better product in every technical sense, I wound up enjoying it substantially less. It's how I feel now with Avalanche's new work. Hey, look, if you want to blow up things in an open world, there's no better game that focuses almost entirely on that. Paying about $1 per satisfying game hour is a rare thing in this industry, and you can certainly do a lot worse. But, and it keeps tugging on me, but I can't help but feel they didn't think big enough. They didn't think wacky enough. They didn't build a universe that was technically responsive enough. They brought new pros to the table, but also new cons. There's a ton of fun to be had in Just Cause 3, but after 6 years, I expected Avalanche to move the needle a bit further than they did. 7 out of 10. It may not be the first, but it is the nth review. I've been your host, Nick Pfeiffer. Stay tuned for our next episode where I reunite with Remedy's time-manipulating action chops in their new cinematic experiment, Quantum Break. Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out my previous review for Fallout 4. Don't forget to head over to GamerType.com for more original content and adventure, and hey, I'll see you next time.